Alright, we're live. Let's do this thing. We got 500 anime. I think we have now 125 left to do. We're just going to finish up the remainder of it today as soon as we're able to. But yeah, drink for today, Forehead Sour Watermelon. Not a bad drink. Well, I haven't tried it yet, but it sounds not terrible. But yeah, let's just get straight into it. First up, we have another isekai. This one's about a demon lord being reincarnated into the same kingdom, and it's all different and crap, but it's just a basic isekai once again. C tier. Next up we have The Greatest Disciple, Kenichi. Kenichi, this one is about a dude who wants to be strong to basically save people, and he trains under a bunch of martial artists. This is one my boss recommended to me. In terms of anime, it wasn't bad, not necessarily my type. B tier. Up next we have, I think this is The Flavors of Youth. This one is a movie. It seemed kind of similar in composition and shot style to Your Name, but it was a fairly interesting one to watch. It basically takes three perspectives and doesn't necessarily tie them all together, but just takes three different perspectives on a show. And yeah, it was fairly interesting. Not a huge fan of movies though. A tier for that one. Up next, we have, I'm pretty sure, another isekai. Yeah, strongest sage with the weakest crest. This one, really strong, powerful sage, dies, gets reincarnated, and the entire world is different because demons are manipulating them and crap. Basic isekai. Well, not a great isekai. Next up, we have A World Without Dirty Jokes. This one definitely has a raunchy humor, not necessarily my type of humor, but I mean, each their own. In terms of quality of show, there were definitely some funny moments during it though. While I don't like raunchy humor, this one definitely had some ones that I did enjoy. So we're going to put that in S tier. Up next, we have, oh boy, The Fruit of Evolution. Before I knew it, my life had it made. But yeah, this one, garbage. I don't know. If you want to see a bunch of animals in a harem, then by all means go ahead. It somehow got greenlit for season 2. I personally don't understand how exactly that happened, but it happened. I'm going to put this in F tier because it was slightly painful to watch. Up next, we have The Overly Cautious Hero. This one, a lot of people absolutely loved and consider it one of the better isekais. I did not. I found it to be an average isekai, because the entire thing was like building up to this one moment. It starts out as a comedy, then goes to drama, and if you've watched previous streams of mine, then you are aware I do not like that. It kind of kills the momentum that the show originally had, the reason I watched the show, and it completely changes it. Next up, we have Attack on Titan. No question about it, it's an SSS tier. There's hardly anything wrong. Very easy to get sucked in. Season 3 was baller. Season 4 was baller. The ending, at least on the anime, was really good. I didn't particularly, I didn't watch the whole, I didn't read the manga, so I'm not really sure how it actually ended, but I know a lot of people didn't like how the manga ended, so much so that they decided to send death threats to the author. But I mean, I definitely wouldn't go that far. Next, we have, is this Death Parade? No. Itoki the Shinobi, or Shinobi Itoki, one of those two. Shinobi no Itoki. This one's about ninjas. A dude is born into a family of ninjas, doesn't learn it until like way later in life. He basically becomes the ruler of a ninja clan and has to train to become a ninja. Overall, the show was pretty garbage. I would say way below average, mostly just because they didn't really seem to put a lot of effort into, you know, making it seem realistic. Like, all of a sudden everybody accepts him just because he's the son of the ruler, but he hasn't known about ninja society up until the point that they introduce him to it, and then you just expect everyone to take this very untrained person and put him in as the leader. And I didn't particularly enjoy that because it just felt way too unrealistic. Granted, it's an anime, you're gonna get unrealistic things, but didn't particularly love it. Up next, we have Squid Girl. Not to be confused with Squid Games, though the names are similar. This one, about a squid who is a girl, basically comes out of the ocean and tries to take over the world and completely fails. It's a comedy. A lot of the comedy of it is very old school anime comedy, where it's kind of more slapstick and what the crap is this character saying-esque comedy. But yeah, overall, it wasn't terrible. I would say slightly above average. It definitely got annoying after a little bit, so there probably have some of my favorite depictions of Americans, because they make Americans seem really stupid and obsessed with MIT, and it's, honestly, I loved it. Up next, we have a train anime. Don't remember what it's called though, but it came out this last season. Uh, but yeah, it was originally advertised by the train company, one of the train companies in Japan, and they are the one that greenlit it. It's an anime original about these people who are trying to travel across a dreamlike world because it has been affected by 7G. It's kind of a play on the whole 5G conspiracy theory event, and it was really funny for that. A lot of the comedy, while it is slapstick, it's a lot better done slapstick than I think most other comedy animes are able to do. But yeah, I would probably put this one in S tier. It's pretty easy to get absorbed. It does kind of get a little bit serious later on, but it doesn't take itself as seriously as some other ones that seem to do that complete 180 on the tone of the show. Up next, we have whatever this one was. I forgot. It's like, here we go. It is called Saint Cecilia and Pastor Lawrence. This one is about a pastor and a saint falling in love, which I'm pretty sure that's not really allowed, but I mean, hey, it was a fairly good as far as romance goes, except for the fact that the romance seems to kind of drag on throughout most of the series. Another one of those ones where you're kind of going through like 12 episodes just so you can potentially see them hold hands, which definitely does drop it a bit. I'd probably say B tier. Up next, we have Skip and Loafer. This one was one that came out a while ago, and it is probably one of the better romances out there. I don't think... Well, it kind of seems like it's going to the direction of romance. Within the first season, they never really make any progression whatsoever, which I know I just ranked that one lower for it. But this one, it almost seems like it's trying to be a romance without trying to be a romance, where it seems to have a much more go into it slowly type feel. It basically does it a lot better than this one does. I'm going to put that in SS tier. It was just overall a fantastic show. Not too many areas that I would say really need improvement, but yeah. Up next, we have The Executioner and Her Way of Life. This one starts out like a stereotypical isekai, but after the first episode, it does a complete 180 with a plot twist, and so I would definitely recommend it for that. I'm not going to go into it because of that, but personal ranking, I would probably say is B tier, slightly above average. Up next, we have Sora no Wato. Sora no Wato. This one is a show basically about girls in the army, specifically about one girl who wants to be a trumpet player, and so she goes to the army to do it. It kind of gives K-On! Vibes. If I remember correctly, it is done by Kyoto Animations, similar to K-On! Yeah, I thought it was a pretty good one. I'm going to put that in A tier. It definitely is a bit more slice of life with that undertone of war. Yeah, if you haven't seen it, I would give that one a watch. Up next, we have I've Been Killing Slimes for 300 years and maxed out my level. Another isekai. It's isekai, kills slimes for 300 years and maxes out her level, becomes really strong, and it's all about the shenanigans that happens whenever people learn that she's really strong. Up next, we have I'm Quitting Heroine, if I remember correctly. We're once again out of order on this thing, which is tragic. It was in order for a while, but banished from the hero's party, I decided to live a quiet life. This one takes place in, once again, a kind of Tolkien-esque world where there's a lot of people who just kind of basic magecraft and all that stuff. Personally, I wasn't a huge fan of it just because, you know, it kind of was like all most other animes. It was slightly below average, unless you want to add season 2, in which case I would probably say it's more of a D tier. Alright, up next we have the Instant Death Ability anime. This is another one that came out recently. It's another isekai. And as far as isekai go, I saw one list that ranked it as like a number 5 isekai anime. This was just a basic isekai anime though, not too much to write home about. Next up we have Somali and the Forest Spirit. This is one of the first few I watched. In terms of anime, it's definitely one where you start it and you can tell it's going to end up really sad. The entire premise is that there's a human living among monsters, and the human is trying to make it to where all the other humans are. As you follow her as this is happening, you realize, oh, like, what happened to humans, and it kind of gives you a little bit more of the lore of the world at that moment in time, and it was honestly a pretty good anime. I would definitely give it a recommend. I'll throw it on S tier. Next up, we have the good old classic My Dress Up Darling. One of the few ones where there was a little bit of raunchy humor, but I was like, dang, this is actually really funny. Yeah, there's multiple good moments. Probably an S tier anime. I know a lot of people love it, and I'm very excited for the next season to come out. Up next, we have Heaven's Lost Property. This is another one that my boss recommended to me. This was kind of the point in time when I realized that me and my boss have a very different taste in anime. This one, in terms of shows, was once again very raunchy humor. That seems to be kind of the style my boss goes for. Yeah, he recommended it to me, and there's definitely some really funny jokes. It's one of those ones where you have to sit through a bunch of kind of medium tier jokes, you know, like a C tier, D tier jokes, just to get that one SS tier joke. But once that SS tier joke hits, it's fantastic. I would probably say around B tier. Next up, we have A Place Further Than the Universe, I believe. Yeah, A Place Further Than the Universe. This one's about people going to Antarctica. There's a lot of parts about it that I really loved. It's definitely one of the better CGDCTs out there. And once again, it kind of has one of those undertones that I absolutely love, where it's not necessarily happy, but not really sad. Kind of just more, you know, somewhat melancholic mixed with a little bit of nonchalant. But yeah, SS tier. Next up, we have When Will Ayumu Make His Move? This one is once again one of those romances where nothing really seems to happen, made by the same creator of the Teasing Master Takagi-san. I definitely think Teasing Master Takagi-san was a better one than this one is, but this one is still an A-tier anime. Honestly, I do believe that as far as progression goes on that, it's a bit more understandable as to why it doesn't really seem to progress, because the main character won't confess his love until he beats his crush in shogi. And so it's all about him basically training to become a better shogi player to try and confess. Up next, we have Are We Lost? I think. Oh, Are You Lost? Are You Lost is about the girls getting lost on an island and having to live. The comedy of it definitely kind of fell off after the first few episodes. A lot of it was very raunchy humor. It really tried to kind of put itself out there as, hey, look at these girls, they're doing really raunchy things, and have that be the comedy aspect of it. I'm going to say it was a D tier. If I remember correctly, it was a short, though. But yeah. I definitely think it could have been better. Up next, we have what I consider to be one of the worst anime out there, Twin Star Sorceress. I somehow met a person who really loved this one, but a lot of the romance felt very forced and tropey. The action was more often than not seemed more poorly done, and there was even that one episode where they decided to dance with the enemies because they were stressed or something, which I still have no idea what was happening in that episode, but it was more akin to an LSD trip than watching a TV show. But yeah, that one is a FF tier. It was very painful. I don't know how I finished it, but there's 50 episodes, and yeah. Next up, we have Frieren. This one is a triple S tier. There's no doubt about that. It's currently ranked number 1 on MAL, and rightfully so. Basically, you follow an elf as she travels after beating the Demon Lord. Up next, we have Spy Classroom. This one was kind of one where I started it thinking, oh man, we're gonna get really cool, epic spy scenes, but they don't seem to really understand what a spy is like most spy shows. They treat spy more as like a special ops type thing. But yeah, I mean, they put in effort towards the show. It's another CGDCT though, which also dropped it some. I'd say it's slightly above average, but nothing really to write home about. It's another one of those shows where every episode you're introduced to a new character and then you get that character's backstory. So there's never, while at the same time having that coherent plot. Up next, we have Spy Family. This one's another really good one. It's one of the more family-friendly ones on this list too. I actually watched the Spy Family movie in theaters, and there's a lot of families there, which I thought was really cool. But yeah, this one, as far as comedy goes, I think is definitely out there on the more creative side too. We're going to stick that in the SS tier, because, I don't know, I don't think you could really go too wrong with Spy Family. Up next, we have The Perfect Insider. This is another kind of detective type show where you have a person who goes into a room and it's a perfect murder scenario, and you kind of figure out or not perfect murder, but the locked room. But they go in and they have to try and figure out what's happening, but they themselves are not actual detectives. They're just people who are on the smarter end trying to figure out what the heck is happening in the place they're locked in. But yeah, as far as shows go, I would probably say somewhere high A tier, low S tier. I'll put it in A tier just to balance them out for now, but it was definitely one of the better kind of detective shows out there. or I guess especially when it comes to anime. It deals a lot with kind of the programming languages as well, which was interesting to watch. Next up, we have Sugar Apple Fairy Tale. This one is a fairly interesting one. It definitely seems to be more geared towards the female audience. I didn't hate it. I do think that the first season was really good, and the second season dropped off a little bit whenever they focused more on the work aspect of it than the actual romance aspect of it, as well as introducing some of the villains. I think the villains kind of just made the story a little bit worse than whenever it was just, more like, hey, I want to be really good at this job. But yeah, in terms of show, probably B tier. If we're just talking about season 1, it would probably be ranked A tier. But yeah, where it stands right now after the next season, I would definitely put B tier. Up next, we have The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. This one is a fantastic one. If you haven't watched it yet, I would definitely recommend it. It's about a girl who basically thinks things, and if she believes it, it becomes reality. To put it simply, she's almost like a god who doesn't know that she's a god. It was enjoyable. The main character was one of those characters who doesn't portray a lot of emotions, which I typically like watching in anime, depending on how it's done. But yeah, this one, I thought he was done really well, and as well as the kind of goofy antics of the different people that are in her friend group made it really entertaining, and the reasons why they're all friends with her. I do think the Endless Eights arc was definitely a bit painful. I didn't even have to watch it weekly, but it still really just seemed to drag on. Admittedly, this is one of the few shows where I did skip a few episodes. I think I skipped like 2 of the Endless Eights episodes. I just couldn't watch the same thing over and over again in a row. But yeah, this one's probably an S tier. I do think it would have been an SS if it weren't for the Endless Eights arc going on for as long as it did. But from what I understand, there's actually a different director that directed each episode though, so I do think that was interesting to kind of see like where the minor details misalign. Up next, we have something about glasses, I think. Another one I'm going to have to try and find on here to look up, but it's one that came out fairly recently. Another one of those romances that just seems very kind of tropey in how it's done, as well as never really goes anywhere. The main character is kind of cringy to watch, so it's not one that I would recommend personally. But yeah, it may be the type of show you like. The animation of it was done by the same animator of the Masterful Cat is Depressed Again Today. They are definitely daring in how they decide to animate things. The first opening sequence was like a solid 2 or 3 minute long sequence of the character just walking one camera shot throughout a 3D world, which doing a 3D environment is definitely risky when doing 2D characters on top of it, because you run the risk of it not necessarily lining up or anything. They did an okay job with it, but I do think this was a little bit more janky than the Masterful Cat is Depressed Again Today. I know a lot of people really liked it, but some of the shots they went for I think were a bit too daring and kind of harmed how the show was. I'm going to put it in C tier. It's interesting to watch it, to kind of see what was going through the director's mind. Other than that, I didn't think it was worth watching too much. Up next, we have Say I Love You. This one is definitely one of my favorite romances out there. I'm putting it in SSS tier because it's also one of my favorite shows. My friend who's really into romance, I actually got him to watch it as well, and this is one of his favorites. He hasn't finished it yet because he, for some reason, restarts it every like month or so, and he watches it very slowly. So he'll watch like the first 5 episodes, and then he'll restart it and make it 2 more episodes past than where he started last time. So he'd go first watch 5 episodes, watch 7 episodes, second watch would be 7, so on and so forth. But yeah, personally one of my favorites. It seems more realistic in terms of romance as well. Up next, we have Suzume. This is a movie that came out recently, made by the same guy who made Your Name, Weathering with You, and all those good ones. The music, done by Radwimps, of course, fantastic. Similar to those other movies, I had really no complaints about it. Some of the scenes were really well done, really well animated. SS tier. From what I understand, they were actually supposed to be 2 girls as the main characters, but whoever it was that was kind of talking with the director on how it should be written said, no, we don't want that. This isn't what the audience is gonna want. Yeah, up next we have Sword Art Online, a beloved of people who are just barely starting to watch out anime, but then also kind of trashed in the anime community. Personally, I think it's A. I definitely wouldn't say it's above average or bad by any means. There's a reason why so many people like it and get hooked on it at the very beginning, but I don't think it's much better than kind of a starter anime. It's A tier, never really had too much to write home about, never had a whole ton that was super fun to watch. But there were a few moments in the show where I think it definitely picked up a bit more in quality. Up next, we have the late night show, or Tabimachi Late Show. This is I think 4 episodes long. Each episode's only like 5 minutes, and they're all about a different person on perspective on life. I love seeing different perspectives of things. For that reason, I'm putting it in A tier. But yeah, it's a very short watch if you ever have like 20 or 30 minutes that you want to just go watch something short, full story, so on and so forth. But yeah, next up we have Tacto P Destiny. After the first few episodes, I had a lot of really high hopes for this one. It started out fantastic. The entire premise of it was something I'd never thought of, so I thought it was really interesting as well. But I do think later on it kind of fell off, especially when they introduced more of the romance aspects of it. And I think they had a really good idea, but then they didn't really go too far with it. There's conductors who basically lead like battle angels, I think is probably the best way to put it. And while leading these battle angels, they have to kind of conduct. I thought they could have done a little bit more better with the conductor side of it, because they did well as far as making the battle angels go and fight, and the animation on the fights, and how they each have some sort of unique way of fighting. They were all really well thought out, really well done. And then whenever it comes to the side of the conductors, I just feel like there could have been a lot more done to it. For that reason, we're going to put it in A tier, because it had a lot of potential, but they didn't really fully meet said potential. Up next, we have, it's not Tada's Always Listed. Tada Never Falls in Love. This one I thought was a really fun one. Once again, it kind of has that issue that a lot of comedies have, or romance. I believe this one's a rom-com, but more towards the end, it abandons all sorts of comedy and goes for the overdramatic finale, on top of having a grand display of affection at the very end, which are some of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to shows. I don't think that stuff really belongs in a lot of media, but it was there nonetheless. In terms of ending, I definitely didn't like the ending of it, but everything leading up to the ending I thought was really well done. I'd probably stick it in B tier though, because I don't know, thinking back on it, if there was a whole bunch of times when I was like, oh man, this is the crap. Yeah, up next, we have Tsuku no Mi. If I remember correctly, this one's all about getting drunk. Yeah, every episode's about a new beer from X region in Japan, whichever region they decide to do for the day, and it's all about girls getting drunk. I would say it's a CGDCT, but I don't know if you could call the girls cute, because I don't find drunk people really cute, but I think that might have been what it was kind of going for. It definitely seems more like a promotional effort towards specific chains of alcohol, specific brands of alcohol. But yeah, in terms of the actual quality of the show, it gets a little bit repetitive. They try to introduce a few things here and there to kind of spice up the plot, but none of them really ever stick or were super well done. I would say probably slightly below average, just because it gets a little redundant after a while. Up next, we have Tanaka is Always Listless. This one is basically about a dude who's always listless. It's one of the comedies where they seem to keep everything fresh in the comedy aspect. You never really get bored, and once it starts to seem like it might start getting stale, once it starts to kind of lean into getting stale, they switch it up a little bit and introduce a new thing, and whenever they introduce a new thing, it's well done. I'd probably say S tier. If I remember correctly, I think it would be considered more of a Inuyashiki anime, which means it's kind of really slow in how it's done, and is more, every episode's just kind of, how it's described is there to heal you, more like soul healing type anime, but I do think it was definitely worth a watch. Next up, we have The Detective is Already Dead. I think it started off really well, super interesting premise. Not too many complaints about it. Really excited for the next season, though I'm not sure when the next season will come out. But yeah, personally, I think this is probably going to be around a S tier. Up next, we have Tari Tari. This one is about a choir group, another CGDCT. Once again, I'm a sucker for music anime, and this one seemed to mostly do it really well. In terms of actual show, I'd say it's probably A tier. They seem to have a little bit more stereotypical plot lines where there's like, you know, that one character who doesn't like that other character. That was a terrible way of describing it, but a lot of the interactions between characters kind of seem predictable or bland or like they've been done before. But yeah, I do think it was still a solid watch, because there were occasional characters who did seem to add a little bit of new life to the show. Up next, we have the kid from the last dungeon in the boonies, I think. Let's see. Suppose a kid from the last dungeon boonies moved to a starter town. That's what this one is. This one is one of the better kind of overpowered stories there are, as well as misunderstanding stories out there. A lot of animes will kind of have the entire plot revolve around like one or two misunderstandings and having a character thrown into an area where they don't know what they're doing. Similar to how in School of Rock, Blackjack is thrown into a classroom. He has no idea how to teach a classroom, but he still needs to pretend like he knows what he's doing. This one kind of has that, but it's a kid from a dungeon, the last dungeon, and he's basically way too powerful for his own good, and he moves to a starter town where nobody has any concept of what overpowered means. Most of the time, I think these types of shows really fall flat just because there's only so much you can do with, hey, he's really strong. Oh, wow, that's crazy strong. Like, way stronger than I expected, or something along those lines, and he doesn't realize it. But I do think this one handled a lot of that really well. I'm going to put that in A tier. I never got really fully absorbed into the show, but in terms of show, it was still a decent watch. Up next, we have the Tear Moon Empire. This one's another isekai. Well, I guess more of a time travel. The main character gets killed and basically can redo her life. She gets executed, I should say. And she can redo her life up to the point where she gets executed. So she has a diary that she kept, and the diary has all the notes filled out on what happens to her in the future, what causes what, and how to stop it all from happening. Comedy aspect of it, once again, it's just misunderstandings built on misunderstandings. She does something really selfish, or I guess more selfless, in an effort to save herself, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, she's so selfish. Wow, she's so selfless. And whenever she does really anything, everyone's like, oh my gosh, that was so kind of you. But she's just like, I'm just protecting myself. So she's basically selfish with everyone thinking she's selfless. But mediocre as far as shows go. I would probably say B tier. Up next, we have I can't remember the name of this one. Tamako Market, there we go. Tamako Market's another one made by Kyoto Animations. They're one of my favorite studios. It's definitely more slice of life, or I guess Iyashike. Yeah, this one I would probably say is A tier. There's a few comedy parts of it that I didn't think were really funny. Like, they have that one mascot character. I've never really found mascot characters to be all that entertaining, more annoying than anything else. But yeah, she a fairly decent one if you're down to watch a slice of life. Up next, we have The Genius Prince's Guide to Raising a Nation Out of Debt. Hey, how about treason? I bought the books for this. This is the first anime that I ever had read the source material before actually watching the show. Never really want to do that again. If I'm being honest, this kind of ruined that experience for me. The book was really well done. It started off really interesting, kind of built up the characters the way they should be built up. And as soon as you get to the show itself, when you watch it, they butcher it. They start in the middle of the book. They don't actually adapt any of the really interesting parts, and some of the more uninteresting parts they really embellish and kind of turn it into a stereotypical, like, almost fantasy anime, similar to most isekais out there. In terms of actual quality of show, I would probably say it's a D tier. Personally, I would like to put it in F just because it was painful to watch because I had seen the source material, but we're not basing on relation to source material, more of just the enjoyment of the show from the average, or at least from my perspective of the anime alone. Up next, we have High Rise Invasion. This is another one of those shows that seem to really want you to be very kind of brought in by the action moments of it and just kind of absorb you into the different fight scenes, and as well as kind of the suspense of the story. There we go, that's the word. But yeah, they tried to bring you in and basically pointed out as a very suspenseful story. Similar to Miyako-chan, they have the issue where at any point in time when you get really into the show, they decide to do a panty shot, which just completely breaks the immersion. Because I don't know about you guys, but like the last thing I think will help a show is having a random panty shot as someone's about to get their head cut off. Because then it's like all the focus goes from, hey, she's about to get her head cut off, to, oh man, I can see her underwear. But yeah, honestly, D-tier anime. It wasn't painful to get through, but it was just kind of really annoying to watch. Next up, we have The Rising of the Shield Hero. I know a lot of people really loved the first season of this, and then as soon as season 2 came out, it kind of dropped. I watched a video essay that I think kind of stated really well why it seemed to drop a little bit. It's because the main tension that the entire first season kind of has the momentum of stops being there at the end. You know, it's like the entire story kind of revolves around like him trying to make it in a society where the society doesn't accept him. And whenever they decide to, you know, accept him at the end of it, it really just breaks that main tension that kept so many people hooked, and it's no longer there in season 2. All of a sudden, he's the savior of the land. Yeah, for those reasons, we're probably only going to put it in A tier. I do think season 2 and season 3 definitely brought it down in quality. Alright, up next, we have another show that I don't recognize based off of the picture alone. I feel like I should recognize it, though. Here we go. Alright. The Aristocrat's Otherworldly Adventure. Serving gods who go too far. Ah! This one's F tier. It's an isekai, one of the really painful isekais. Another one of those ones where he's really overpowered and the entire thing is, oh my gosh, you did that thing because you're so strong? And he's like, oh yeah, and then I also did this thing. And they're like, oh my gosh, you did that thing because you're so strong? And he's like, yeah, and I also did this thing. And they're like, oh my gosh, you're strong! This is crazy! So much so that even the king gets in on it and is basically has his jaw on the floor at how strong this little child is, who I don't even think has broken double digits. But yeah, painful to watch. Actually, I do think it was very impressive of me to actually finish the show. It's one that I definitely should have dropped because even 12 episodes was a bit too much to watch. And next up, we have another one that came out last season. Reincarnated as Aristocrat, I'll use my appraisal skill to rise in the world. This one's actually got greenlit for a season 2. I'm not sure how exactly that happened. It definitely shouldn't have happened, because it was not good. It's another isekai where he's basically does things and becomes stronger, but the main character is someone who completely gets walked over all of the time. Everyone treats everything as his accomplishments, but the only thing he's actually doing is collecting people who are gonna accomplish things for him. But then as he collects these people, they're all just like, hey, you should do this thing. And he's like, yeah, okay, I'll do that thing. He has no personality whatsoever and was, in general, just one of the worst types of main characters out there, which is just someone with no personality or almost direction in their life. They tried to introduce a little, hey, here's this traumatic moment where he's gonna start becoming better by killing off his father. But then, let's be real, when his father dies, he doesn't feel like he has any emotions. I didn't feel like he had any emotions towards it, where I guess they tried to make it seem like he did, and that it was a big event, but it just didn't really seem like all that. Yeah, up next, we have another isekai anime. This one is My Isekai Life. I gained a second character class and became the strongest sage in the world. Another power fantasy isekai, C tier, not worth watching. Up next, we have, I think, oh dear, is this Weathering with You? Yes, Weathering with You. I think that's weather in Japanese. Yeah, Weathering with You. Weathering with You, I think, was a really good one. It was very interesting. I got fairly invested in it early on. There was a few parts where it's kind of like, doesn't make a whole ton of sense. And I didn't particularly like the ending, because I feel like a lot of times there's happy endings where there shouldn't be happy endings. And I think the ending of this was just a little bit too happy for what the story was. But yeah, other than that, SS tier, beautiful animation. The story, like I said, gets you really invested in it. Yeah, this one, up next we have another isekai. You know, we seem to have a lot of these in these later half, kind of a long stretch of them. Yeah, this one, dude gets reincarnated. into a different body. It starts in a fantasy world. The main character in this fantasy world dies and gets reincarnated into another character from that fantasy world. He's basically wanted to be a mage, couldn't in his first life, then his second life he can be, so he spends his time obsessed with magic. The entire kind of comedy of the show is that he's really strong, and so strong that he doesn't give two craps about what people think. You know, if they think he's too strong, he's just like, whatever. And then if they, try to kill him, he's just like, oh, finally a new toy. They seem to really push the fact that he's really strong, and everybody should worship him for it almost. I really didn't like it. It's almost another isekai, not a ton worth watching. Next up, we have Reincarnated Story as a Sword. Reincarnated as a Sword. This one is another reincarnation anime, another isekai. In terms of isekai, it's a little bit better than the other ones, but I don't think it's enough to break the C tier barrier that we've set for isekai anime. Up next, we have The God of High School. This one is basically a massive tournament arc for a bunch of different people. I do enjoy tournament arcs in anime, but this one kind of seemed to lose itself halfway through and kind of abandon the tournament arc, as well as the fact that it has the issue where the world is incredibly well thought out, but in the anime they don't do a good job of depicting what that actual world was. In terms of show, I'd probably say it was B tier, above average. Some of the powers that the characters had was very interesting to watch, but not a huge fan of the kind of losing its original plot. Up next, we have another isekai. I think this one, a general plot of it is a girl gets reincarnated into another princess wants to basically make magical objects, and so that's what she spends her time doing, because if I remember correctly, she doesn't have magic herself, so magic objects is how she can use magic. She gets so obsessed that she's like, I don't really need to be princess or queen or anything, so I'll just give it to my younger brother. In terms of show, it's a basic isekai. But yeah, next up we have Slime Ken. This is going to be one of those controversial opinions I give, but it's only slightly above average. B tier show. Not very interesting. It's another isekai, another one where the main character gets way too strong way too quickly, and similar to Tsukimichi, they just kind of build a world, and I don't even think Tsukimichi did that really well, because it's just not that interesting to do. Next up we have New Gate, which is like a wannabe SAO, another isekai, and I think it's on the lower end of isekai, so D tier, not worth watching. Next we have a certain it's part of the Certain Magical Index series. I think this is a Certain Scientific Accelerator. No, a Certain Scientific Railgun. This one was another CGDCT. Takes place in the Certain Magical Index world. I do think it's one of the best that came kind of from that universe, mostly because I really like Mikasa, as well as the Mikasa. Season 1, if I remember correctly, takes one of these smaller stories in a certain magical index and really seems to lengthen out and give a different perspective on it, and I really love whenever shows give different perspectives. That's why 86 was ranked so high on my thing, on the first VOD I did. But yeah, this one, it's a solid A tier. I don't know if I was too invested in it, but it was one of the best from that series, and I did quite enjoy it. Next up, we have To Love Ru. Another one of those ones that likes to really push the boundaries between what is anime and what is hentai. Yeah, honestly, it was a bit annoying, a bit raunchy. The main character has inventions that are just don't really seem like they could really exist in the real world, and everything kind of seems to drive the plot towards when can we see boobs next? When can we get to that ecchi? Next up, we have a Certain Scientific Accelerator. I don't think it's as good as Railgun, but it is definitely up there because the Mikasa and Accelerator dynamic I thought was really funny to watch, especially because you don't really see many guy tsunderes, whereas this main character right here is very much a guy tsundere, and he's definitely, the voice actor of him is one of my favorites as well. One of the few people I can actually tell apart in the voice acting. But yeah, up next we have an MMORPG anime. It's another, or I guess a VMO. A playthrough of a certain dude's VR MMO life. This one is basically almost another wannabe SAO, while at the same time wanting to be a very stereotypical isekai. D tier, not worth watching. Up next, I think this one is a certain magical index. Yeah, a certain magical index. This one was mediocre at best, honestly. Index is a very annoying character, and I don't know, it's an interesting world, but I don't think this is the best example of what that world can be. Like I said, they do have a lot of smaller arcs that I think turn out really well, but the spin-off series I think are where the show really starts to actually shine. Up next we have Tomo-chan as a girl, another romance that seems to really never go anywhere later on. Basically, the main character is a girl, best friends with a guy. She wants to be recognized as a girl, but the guy thought she was a guy the entire time, and so he has a really hard time kind of processing the fact that, oh, he can actually go out on a date with her, and she's like someone he likes. But yeah, in terms of show, it's probably A tier. I don't think it was slightly above average by any means. I do think it was a fairly good show, but it just doesn't really seem to take the romance anywhere. Yeah, that's one of the bigger pet peeves, is whenever they don't really seem to take the show anywhere, or the romance anywhere. Next up, we have Tokyo Ghoul. My friend really loves this one. Cannot get into it. I personally didn't like it. Season 1 seemed to just be very edgy for sakes of being edgy. Wasn't a huge fan of it. I do think it could have been a lot better. But yeah, in terms of show, I would probably say that this one drops probably down to C, slightly below average, just because I dropped it before I got to any later seasons. I watched season 1, started season 2, and I couldn't get through season 2 because that was just so bad. But season 1 wasn't bad enough to feel any pain while watching it. Unlike Tomodachi Game, this one, another one of those death game-esque type shows, except there's not really death involved. It's more of just tries to be really dark without ever actually going really dark. Basically, people are in debt. In order to get out of debt, they have to beat other people who are also in debt. So everyone's fighting to kind of become the top of this category so they can get rid of their debt and give it to everyone else. But yeah, this one, probably solid D tier. I did like the opening. To me, that's really the only good thing that came out of this show. A lot of times whenever they had a really big, dramatic, edgy moment, you kind of look at what the character was doing and you're like, nah, that wasn't really edgy. You're trying to make it seem more edgy than it actually was. It was more what a normal person would probably think of doing. Yeah, next up we have Tony, Fly Me to the Moon. Tonikaku Kawaii. This one, a romance. Basically, dude gets hit by the truck in the very beginning, doesn't get isekai'd into another world, and basically, well, the whole reason he gets hit by a truck is because he sees a cute girl across the road, and he's like, dang, I really need to tell that girl that she is cute. So he crosses the road, gets hit by a truck, and yeah, basically the girl's like, what the crap is wrong with you? And he's like, I like you. Do you want to go out with me? And she's like, only if we get married. And that's the plot premise of it. Very cute show. Believe it or not, it does actually go places because, you know, they get married like almost as soon as they meet again. But yeah, solid SS tier show, I would say. Up next, we have Cooking Skill in Another World, if I remember correctly. Campfire cooking in another world with my absurd skill. Another typical anime isekai C tier, not worth going into because it's just an isekai. Up next, My Little Monster. This one, in terms of romance, I think is probably A tier. It's one that I did get invested in a little bit, but at the same time, the main guy can kind of be seen as pretty creepy, which definitely means that like it drops down. Because whenever you have that moment in time, whenever you're watching a show, and there's a character that you're just like, makes me somewhat uncomfortable, it just doesn't become as enjoyable of a watch. But yeah, that's kind of where that one ends up. Next up, we have Toradora. Classic tsundere main character, romance anime. Once again, romance doesn't really seem to go much anywhere. I really didn't like a lot of the side characters that were in the show, or Taiga. Taiga was kind of annoying more than anything else. I think tsunderes in general are more annoying than cute. But yeah, A tier anime. Up next, we have Trinity 7. I think the best way to describe that is a high school DxD wannabe. Not a huge fan of it. Slightly above average. Another one where they just try and get to the nudity as quickly as they can. But yeah, not really my type of show. Next up, we have Tsukigakure. This one is probably the most realistic romance you'll ever find in anime. It is with high schoolers though, so it's like awkward. Yeah, it definitely has a much slower pace, so it's not for everyone. But yeah, they do seem to actually go places in the anime. I would probably rank it at A tier as well though, just because when watching it, it's so realistic to the point that it's almost boring. But yeah, next up, Tsukimichi Moonlit Fantasy. Like I said, it's similar to Slime. I Got Reincarnated as a Slime anime in the sense that it's a basic isekai. It does a little bit better than other isekais, I think, but not enough to really put it anywhere above, slightly above average in B tier. Up next, Tsuredere Children. This is another one where it's just a bunch of cute little stories about different people, different high schoolers in different romance scenarios. I thought it was a really fun watch. I'll put it at an S tier. It was fun to watch all the different stories, and if you ever found one story boring, then at some point in time it would switch to the next story. And they always seem to keep consistent characters throughout the stories though, so you're never, if you do enjoy a story, eventually you'll get back to it. Up next we have Fireworks. If I remember correctly. Yeah, that's such a long name in Japanese that it's all shortened down to Fireworks for some reason. Yeah, this one, kind of a Groundhog Day anime. Not a huge fan of Groundhog Day. U tier anime. Yeah, I do think they had some interesting premises in it, but I really didn't like the fact that I was almost sometimes seeming to watch the same thing over and over again. Up next, if it's for my daughter, I'd even destroy a demon lord. This one is written by Funa, which most of the time when Funa comes out with a show or an anime is released adapted from one of their books, I tend to think it's a bit on the lower end just because they're all pretty much isekais. They all kind of fit that like perfectly average isekai mark for me. Next up, don't remember what this one is actually called. Tsurane? Basically about archery, which, fun fact, Tsurane is the sound that the bow makes whenever the arrow releases from the bow, which is an interesting fact I thought. But yeah, this one, it's a sports anime. I think it's one of the better sports animes out there, but I'm not a huge fan of sports anime, so I'll probably just stick it in A tier. I haven't seen the most recent season though, so I'm not sure if it dropped too much in quality based off of the new season, but I hope not. It's one of the better ones out there. Up next, we have, I think it's like Murder Farce Mystery Madam something or other. No, it's Undead Girl Murder Farce. There we go. Undead Girl Murder Farce is another detective one. This is actually how I discovered that Sherlock Holmes is now in the public domain, which that was an interesting thing to see, kind of have him actually in an anime as a character. But yeah, it's another detective type show. This time using more supernatural things because, you know, undead girl. It's carrying around a decapitated head most of the show that can talk. But yeah, this is I'd say a solid A tier show. You know, it wasn't too bad, but occasionally it kind of dragged on. So there were moments when you did get absorbed, but I think that kind of counteracted it and brought it down from S to A. Up next, we have another one of those shows that just comedy wasn't fully there. How Clumsy You Are, Miss Ueno. This one, basically a girl is a very clumsy scientist, makes a bunch of inventions. She makes a bunch of inventions that just kind of don't work in her favor. It's kind of like a whole story built around the whole genie in a bottle, like, careful what you wish for, because you might get what you want, but, like, not actually with some sort of twist. But yeah, in terms of show, it's C tier. The comedy gets very old very fast. Luckily it was a short though, which made it a bit shorter and less time to get through. Up next we have Umurachi Oni-san. This is probably one of my favorite comedies out there. Basically the main host of a children's show hates his life and has to deal with children the entire time, and so whenever the children are being kids, he's basically suffering from it. There's a lot of really funny comedies about how he's depressed and the children don't know what that is, and so kind of just keep on asking him more and more questions that just brings him down and just further and further down. But yeah, I'd say probably an SS tier show, one of the better comedies out there. Up next we have Under Ninja. Under Ninja started out really good. It has such an interesting animation style to it. There's a lot of parts in it where you're just kind of like, what the crap was this idea? It's definitely one of the shows that kind of has a more what the heck time humor, more leans into absurdity than anything else. But I do think it really worked for the show. They had a really good job, and especially with the animation style, it just kind of screams like a damper mood. But the damper mood mixed with the absurdity was kind of a very interesting clash. But yeah, the show itself I would probably say is A tier. The absurdity of it definitely made it kind of hard to get into the show, but yeah, the ending also wasn't the greatest. But if you want to see that the ending was, I will leave that up to you. Up next, we have Tokyo Revengers. Really strange one, I think, especially since gang animes have started to come out a little bit more often now. I do think that this one was a good one, but I'm not sure if it would hold up as much if I were to give it a rewatch, because looking back on it, I don't remember if it was a fantastic show. I think it was mostly just one of those instances of me being fairly new to anime, watching it and being like, yo, it's an anime, it has to be cool. But yeah, from what I remember, I would probably rank it in S tier. There were a bunch of different times I got invested in it, and I did really like a lot of the characters in the show. Next, we have Usagi Drop, one of the few shows where it has children in it, and I actually really enjoyed it. Another one where the dude basically starts taking care of child, similar to like Alice Dozoroko or Gakugen Babysitters, but this one seemed to really honestly do it better than all of those ones in my mind. I'm going to go ahead and say that this was an SSS tier. It was super interesting to watch. And yeah, it's definitely one that I would recommend. I have the manga for it. Unfortunately, it's not translated in English, so I'm going to have to learn Japanese to actually read it. Yeah, next up, we have Urara Merocho. I have no idea how that would be pronounced, but this one was one of the first few I watched. And surprisingly, it seemed like not a whole lot of people watched it, but I've seen it appear occasionally in like video essays or other kind of AniTuber videos. But yeah, the show itself was just a CGDCT. There were a lot of cringy moments during it, and I would say it's slightly below average. So while it was one of the first ones I watched, it's not one I look back fondly on. Up next, we have Vinland Saga. This one, I definitely didn't enjoy it as much as other people did. I haven't seen the second season yet, though, so that could be part of the reason why. But when I did watch it, it was a solid S tier. I don't know if I would rank it higher than that, but like I said, I haven't seen season 2, so it may just be my ignorance that puts it there. Up next, we have Venetus, Vanitas no Carte, or the case study of Venetus. This one was an interesting one. It's one about vampires, probably the only one about vampires that I've actually enjoyed. I'd probably S tier. It's one of those ones where the guys are really hot, and so they definitely leans more towards the Yuri audience, just because they're really hot and they kind of play around a bit. It's kind of like a act lovey-dovey without being lovey-dovey. You have that kind of like a romance going on with the bickering that they do and everything. But it was a good one. The animation was really cool and probably the best vampire ones out there. Up next, we have Violet Evergarden. Honestly, one of my favorites. Probably one of the best ones that you can find on Netflix outside of like a silent voice. But yeah, SS tier. The animation on it was beautiful. It's a bunch of different stories about her. She's basically a hardened war soldier trying to learn what emotion is probably the best way to put it. But yeah, I absolutely loved it, and I know a lot of people did as well. Up next, we have Vivi Floretai's Song. This one is a time travel anime where the main character has to try and fix the future. A robot comes back from the past, tells the main character that she's the key to fixing everything, and so she tries to fix everything. But yeah, it was a solid animation. The music and sound design of it was fantastically done. Honestly 10 out of 10 show. Would recommend. SS tier. Next we have the Uzaki-chan Wants to Hang Out. This one I personally really didn't like it. It's another one where romance that doesn't really seem to go anywhere. The comedy gets really old really quickly, and yeah, they try to introduce more characters, but the characters seem very unrealistic a lot of times. Yeah, for that reason, it's probably only a slightly above average for me. Like, I don't think it was bad by any means, but it was definitely very hard to get into. Up next, we have Any Way I Look at It, It's Your Guys' Fault I'm Not Popular. This is the most classic of classic NEET stories, I think. The main character is basically a female incel, and she blames all her problems on other people, and you watch her try to become famous only to fail because, you know, she is an incel almost and is too busy blaming other people for her issues rather than admitting to herself that it's her fault and trying to fix it for herself. But yeah, honestly, F tier show, very painful to watch, just not super interesting. Up next, we have Didn't I Say Make Your Abilities Average in My Next Life? Remember correctly, this is another Funa show, and it's an isekai, you know, next life, C tier. Up next, we have... crap, I don't remember. This is a... Beauty is My Job, if I remember correctly. Yeah, this one's main character basically tries to be perfect, ends up being very conceit whenever she tries to be perfect, though. I'd say it wasn't an awful show, but, you know, it definitely... There was some interesting, kind of bizarre moments to watch it at. It definitely started probably as like a C tier show for me, though. I do think it was really hard to get into at first, but then the more you watch it, the more you get into it, because the more they kind of introduce the characters as well as the drama, and some of the characters become a bit more believable at that moment in time, whenever at first they were all just kind of conceited and narcissistic throughout a lot of it, and just kind of to the point where they were unbelievable. But yeah, once you finish this show, I think it kind of goes up to A tier, but before that, before you actually get into those later episodes, it definitely drops in quality for them. Up next, we have Windbreaker, another anime about gangs, except this one, the entire school's a gang that protects a town. Animation was really good. Story was kind of so-so. I don't think it was anything to really write home about. It just seemed kind of stereotypical shonen-esque type show where dude wants to be the strongest and makes friends along the way. But yeah, probably B tier, slightly above average. I think the animation definitely brought it up on that. Up next, I believe it's the Angel Descended Upon Me or something along that. An Angel Flew Down to Me. This is a CGDCT with a really creepy female MC. I do think this is one of those shows that's like a quintessential where a guy as the MC, it'd be incredibly creepy. But yeah, the show itself just wasn't super interesting. Probably a C tier. But yeah, she basically dresses up the little girls that she finds cute. Up next, we have Working. We have two different ones for Working. We have Wagnaria and then www.working, which are two different stories. Wagnaria is the original and www is the spin-off. I do think the original was probably an S tier, one of my more favorite comedies, kind of similar to Servant X Service in how it's told. It's basically working at a food environment, and similar to Servant X Service, they have a lot of characters that you would find, or tropes that you would find within the, like, working a food job, which was mostly my main job for about 4 years, so I found it very funny to kind of watch the stereotypes of people I know working. www.wagnaria, I think, was an interesting spin-off. I don't think it was better than the original, though, just because they kind of took the tropes it had. Oh, looks like I put them on different ones. But yeah, www, I think, is more of a tier, whereas Wagnaria is an S tier. Up next, we have Wonder Egg Priority. Wonder Egg Priority, I definitely will probably put higher than most people would, just because this is the show that, like, originally got me into anime. It was watching it was the first time I was like, holy crap, animation is actually really cool. Before that, I had seen just a few ones here and there, like We're in High School Host Club, and that was not my type of show at all, and just kind of shows similar to that, whereas I watched it but it was kind of meh. And then I watched Wonder Egg Priority, and those, I think, only 3 episodes had released whenever I first watched it. I watched those first 3 episodes and I was like, dang, animation can be cool. I'm gonna put it in S tier. I do think it definitely fell off at the end there, which is why it's not going to go up any higher. If they had kept the momentum that they had in those first, like, 5 or 6 episodes, it probably would have been an SSS tier show for me, but they really butchered that ending. I haven't seen the kind of special that they released to kind of wrap it all up, just because I don't want to ruin the show any further. Up next, we have the crap. This is a, don't remember what it's called, but it's one of the Chinese animations that's been coming out recently. Oh, The Daily Life of the Immortal King. If I remember correctly, I think that's what it was. But this one of the few Chinese animations that I think actually did fairly well. It does definitely kind of lose the plot line every few episodes. Like, there's one episode where just randomly Pokemon exist, or I guess the equivalent of Pokemon exist in this universe, but on those instances, I don't think it was too far from the original show. It definitely never took itself seriously from the beginning. But yeah, in the actual show, I'd probably say is A tier. If they had kept in line with the plot a little bit more, it probably would have been an S tier show, but yeah, I do think it's still worth a watch. Up next, we have, I think, New World is what it's called. No, World Trigger, that's what it is. World Trigger is a show where basically neighbors invade the world. Neighbors are people from other worlds, and they have to defend against them. It was okay. I do think it definitely could benefit from more seasons and go on. It's kind of similar to, I want to say, like One Piece and Dragon Ball, or shows like that, where it seems to benefit from going on longer, just because there's so much in the world that needs to be told before they can actually like get to really interesting parts, and so on and so forth. So I do think it's definitely up there though, in A tier. Definitely was a bit harder to get into occasionally though. Up next, we have Wotakoi, Love is Hard for Otaku. I loved this one. It's one of the few adult romance animes out there. Unlike most romance animes, they don't spend 3 hours pussyfooting around the idea of falling in love only to spend the last episode finale to hold hands. Stuff actually happens in this show. And it's funny, you know, especially being somebody who's really into anime stuff. There's the two characters are both very kind of otakus and really into that. The main guy being into games, main girl being into like yuri anime, and then the side characters as well, both being very into kind of that area. But yeah, honestly, probably an SS tier, one of the better romances out there. I would definitely recommend. Up next, we have Oregaru, which SSS tier show, one of my favorites, probably the best of all time. The comedy of it's really funny. I find the main character was like essentially who I was way back in middle school, and so it's very interesting to watch that as well as read it. When you read the books, you definitely get a whole deeper perspective as to what Hachiman is thinking. I really loved the dynamic between the three characters, because unlike most love triangle romances, the two girls are actually best friends, and it's one of those few ones where no matter who wins, you're gonna both be very happy, but also really sad. Happy because somebody won and you're happy for that person, but then really sad because that means that someone else had to lose. But it does a fantastic job kind of balancing that. Up next, we have the good old classic Promised Neverland. I haven't seen Season 2, but I've heard it really drops the show off, so this is just ranking off Season 1, because as far as I'm concerned, Season 2 doesn't exist. But yeah, Season 1, fantastic plot twist, really well done. They kept to the manga really well, and I had really no complaints. I think the only complaint I did have was that the children seemed a bit too smart for their age, but I mean, that can kind of be counteracted with the fact that they're supposed to be child geniuses, and that's the only reason they were able to make it to as old as they were. But yeah, SS tier show, because Season 2 doesn't exist. Up next, we have Someone in the Seven Witches. Let's see if we can have a fun time trying to find that. Would it be in the W's? Yamada-kun and the Seven Witches. Another kind of harem-esque anime. Main character can steal people's abilities by kissing them. Fun. As far as harems go, I don't think it was too bad. As well as the kissing plot. Typically in a show seems to really drag it down for me, just because it's a plot device to try and get to ecchi most of the times. In this one, it was somewhat used that way. I think they did it a bit more better not sure what the word I'm thinking of to describe it is, but they did a little bit better of a job with it. They just treated it like a little less raunchy and more like it was a plot device of the story. I'm not saying that they only treated it like a plot device to the story. That there definitely was like raunchy parts about it, but it was slightly above average, I'd say, if I had to pick between above and below. Up next, we have Yamada-kun to basically my love story with Yamada at level 999. Another romance where it just doesn't really seem to go anywhere up until the very end whenever they decide to hold hands. Wonderful, I know, beautiful. Everything you want in a romance. No plot progression, so on and so forth. C tier. But yeah, if that's your type of show, I mean, you might enjoy it. Up next, we have... Crap, it's like Song of the Night, Call of the Night. Call of the Night, I really loved the art style of. It's very kind of neon and has some of my favorite nighttime animations that I've ever seen in a show. They definitely didn't have to go as hard with the art direction as they did, and the show definitely benefited from it. The show itself is a vampire show. I don't know if it's like the most fantastic vampire show of vampire shows. I do think as you go on a little bit more, some of the kind of comedy or a plotline just feels a little bit dull. Yeah, it just kind of feels like it's on a hamster wheel running around in circles at times, but I mean, they definitely could take it places. I'd say a solid A tier show. I don't know if the art style would bring it up to S tier, but it's definitely up there on the type of shows that I on one of the shows of all time. A tier show. Up next, we have... I forgot the name of this one. Saga of Tanya the Evil. There we go. This one is one of my friend's favorite shows. Saga of Tanya the Evil, personally, I'm not a too huge a fan of it, because it is an isekai, and the main character seems really powerful and smart for the age she is, which they kind of write off as it's an isekai, but I don't know, I really struggle seeing a child and being like, yeah, but are you really that smart enough to, like, basically be Sherlock squared? But yeah, Saga of Tanya the Evil, basically, dude gets killed, is a horrible person in his life, and God's like, you are a horrible person in your life, and the dude's like, I don't believe in you, so screw yourself. And yeah, then God's like, you don't believe me? Well, no, screw you, I'm gonna send you into the worst world I could send you into. And yeah, it was a fun story to watch. In terms of isekai, I would say it's definitely one of the better ones out there. I don't know if I would rank it too highly, probably just more top of A tier terms, but yeah. Up next, we have Classroom of the Elite. Another one where the main character is incredibly smart while being dead-faced, kind of manipulating the scenes behind them from the shadows. Yeah, this one, I don't think it's bad. I definitely really loved Season 1 and that plot twist that they threw at the end there. But having read the source material, I do think they kind of botched it from the source material, just because the source material seems to really give the main character a personality, almost, which I thought was very unique, and I did like his personality in the actual story. But yeah, the show itself, I don't know if I would rank it too highly, probably only A tier, just because, I don't know, at some point in time, it kind of gets annoying that the main character seems to show no emotion throughout the entire thing. A lot of the interactions with other people seem to be carried by the other people. So it's a really good show in the sense that the side characters are really well fleshed out, but the main character himself just doesn't seem to have much of a personality after a time. He just seems very dead inside the entire time, and then you realize, oh, maybe it's not because he's dead inside, but because there's no personality inside. But yeah, up next, we have Dreaming of a Realistic Girlfriend? The Dreaming Boy is a realist. There we go. This one, another romance that seems to go nowhere. I don't even think they got to holding hands at the end. It was interesting, like, the first 2 episodes, but then it's kind of turned into, like, a slice of life high school with a romantic subtext, while at the same time trying really hard to be a romance anime, which it just doesn't really balance all the ideas that they had throughout the show. Some of the art, I think it was pointed out in one kind of comment section on MAL, that a lot of it looks very AI generated, which I think was kind of detrimental towards the show itself, but I don't think it was like below average, so I'd probably say B tier. Up next, we have Yuna of the Haunted Springs. Yuna and the Haunted Hot Springs. There we go. Another one that's purely there for fan service. Not a huge fan of that. Story itself was mediocre as well. Not really worth watching, especially whenever you get to the OVA or any of those things. They just feel very like everything happens purely to get to the ecchi moments. C tier show. Next we have Laid Back Camp. This one's another Iyashike. One of those shows where not much happens. It's a CGT-CT, one of the best ones out there in my opinion. This one, probably an SS tier. It's fantastic. I loved watching it before I went to bed because it's just one of those shows that's like very calming and everything. Very calming, and when you watch it, you just have a good time. Granted, if you're one of those people who's really loves shonen and those types and can't really watch a show if there's no action, then I wouldn't recommend it because, once again, they're camping. The entire show is just about girls going on camping trips. Up next is Yuri Yuri. Yuri Yuri. This one is a interesting one. Every character is a girl. I don't think a guy exists in this universe, which is a little bit hard to get behind. But yeah, it's one of the quintessential CGD-CT anime in my opinion. I didn't hate it. Some of the jokes are really funny. They take the whole thinking about something inappropriate and having a nosebleed trope and basically take that to the extreme where the person's anemic because of it, which that was funny more often than not. Maybe because this was almost one of my first introductions into that trope. But yeah, I'd say probably a B tier show. Up next we have Moriarty the Patriot, if I remember correctly. This one, it's kind of a Code Geass, but with better animation, I'd say, and a little bit different story. Basically, main character is being a very evil person to root out the evil in the world. In terms of story, I'd say probably S tier as well as animation. There was a lot of good moments in the show whenever the character would kind of be all, evil and sentence people to their doom for basically being a really crooked, rich, noble person. It takes place in early England times whenever Sherlock exists. It's another show that kind of has Sherlock as a character. Yeah, up next we have The Hero is Dead. If I remember correctly, Yusha Gashinda. The legendary hero is dead. Yeah. Comedy. It's purely a comedy. Takes place in a Tolkien-esque fantasy world. I'd say C tier. Actually, no, it was painful to watch. It's an F tier show. The comedy wasn't very good. I think the only time I laughed was whenever they were treating radishes like thighs and fondling them, because that was like weird. And it was kind of not necessarily one of those like, ah ha 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 ha, man, that's hilarious laughs. More of those like really awkward, like get me out of here type laughs. And that seemed to be mostly the entire story. Main character wasn't really likable at all, nor were any of the side characters in my opinion. But yeah, next up we have I couldn't become a hero, so I reluctantly decided to get a job. One of my first experiences with the ecchi type shows. Definitely not worth watching in my opinion. It's on the lower end of those types of shows. I'd say probably D tier. It wasn't too painful to get through, but I definitely didn't really enjoy it. Next up we have the Beast Tamer. Another harem, but this time they're anthropomorphic animals like dog girls and cat girls and crap. This one, B tier, okay show. It is a bit Tolkien-esque fantasy, which makes it a bit hard to get behind, but there's the occasional story that they have that I thought brought it up on the list. Up next, we have another show that looks like I quit heroing. I'm quitting heroing, or something along those lines. Another one of those garbage shows. I'm gonna be honest, Tolkien-esque fantasy shows, there's just too many of them, so they don't really stand out ever, because they've just been done again and again and again. I think we could stop at Mushoku Tensei and I would be perfectly happy. But yeah, C tier show. Next up, we have the Yuzukai the Yuzukai brothers, I think? The Yuzukai family's 4 sons. This one was an interesting one. It's very slice of life. I wouldn't say it was too good though. It's another one where the kid just seems way too smart for his own age, the youngest. And I don't know, it wasn't a bad watch, I'd say, but it definitely wasn't good, so slightly above average B tier. Up next, we have another Chinese animation. Pause, let me check the walkthrough first. Entirely 3D animated, which I don't know what it is about Chinese 3D animation, but they all seem to have like a certain proportion that they give their characters, and it's very exaggerated in this one, which made the character designs kind of weird to look at. The story itself was okay. Another one of those I'm super powerful and just living life and you think it's funny type shows. C tier, another isekai. Next up we have Zom 100. I haven't seen very many zombie films, and after watching Zom 100, I'm kind of like, if this is the cream of the crop, then I'm good. But yeah, I'd probably rank this one S tier. Very easy to get invested. A little bit later on, it seems kind of, I don't know, there's just some parts that were kind of slowing down the story, I thought. Like, especially whenever they get into the town and they introduce kind of the villains in the story. At that point in time, I was just kind of like, it's not really loving it as much anymore. But remove those evil villain characters and you're probably looking at like an SS tier show. Up next, we have Zombieland Saga. This is the only idol anime, like pure idol anime with CGDCT singing girls-esque show that I can say I truly enjoyed. I have some of their songs in my 10 out of 10 playlist. The music's actually good. If you've ever seen the first episode, then you know probably one of the best isekai moments out there. It is an isekai, but like a good isekai, one of the better ones out there. I'd say an S tier show as well. Next up, we have The Last Summoner. This is another Chinese animation one where they completely abandoned the plot, completely forgot what it was like. I would say probably C tier. It started out really interesting and I was really invested in it. There was like one annoying side character out of the entire cast, which, you know, it's not too uncommon to have at least one character that's annoying, but I could get over the fact that there was one in this one because the plot was interesting. But as you went on later on throughout the show, they just abandoned the plot. Like, at some point in time, it's almost like episode 1 didn't exist and there's a whole new story. Yeah, up next, we have Katanagatari. This one I thought was a really fun one. It took it's made by the same creator who made the Bakemonogatari series, and if I remember correctly, this is actually the more popular one of his series in Japan. But yeah, I have the books. It was a very fun watch. Each episode's like, I don't know, an hour long or so. But if you have the time to sit down and watch it, I think it's fantastic. But yeah, the characters in the show are interesting. The art style and art direction of it, it's by Nisio Isen, so the story is very interesting and dynamic. But yeah, I'd say probably a solid S tier show. Up next, we have Insomniacs After Dark, or Insomniacs After School or something. I haven't gotten to the ending of this one yet. I put it on pause, and I've had it on pause for, I want to say, like 6 months now. But we'll get to it eventually, and what I have seen I've enjoyed quite a bit so far. I'd say probably solid A tier show. You know, not too much offensive in it. It's just two people who have insomnia hanging out together whenever they're after school. And up next we have the Saint is Omnipotent. This is the another isekai. In terms of isekai, I do think it does a little bit better, but a lot of the times throughout the show it was just kind of like, I like it, but it's an isekai, so it's really hard to get invested in it, you know, Tolkien-esque fantasy world, so on and so forth. Alright, and for the last show of this entire series, we have World End. If I remember correctly, World End, where will you be? Let's look it up. It is World End. What do you do at the end of the world? Will you be there for us? Will you save us? Something along those lines. Before starting it, I was kind of like, this is going to be very interesting watch. I thought it was going to be slightly above average, if not below average. Actually, watching the show, though, I'd say it's probably a solid S tier show. Very easy to get invested in. There's a few points in times where it kind of dips and drags, like whenever they're discussing kind of tactics, or whenever there's not as much, whenever they kind of go into more the B plot than the A plot. I think it kind of dragged a little bit, but I do think throughout the entire show they did a pretty good job keeping the momentum, and the ending was interesting to say the least. But yeah, I want to get the books for that one, but I'm struggling to find them in good places. But yeah, so this is the final quarter of the tier list. I hope you guys enjoyed the series. I'm gonna have to find out what the heck I do for the next stream. But yeah, I'm gonna upload it to YouTube, and eventually we'll have the videos actually edited. I'm about halfway done editing out the first one, so it'll probably be like another week or so before it actually gets published, just with how little time I have. But yeah, if you want to join me for the next stream, by all means join me, and I will see you later.